Hi, folks. You were Tacitus today. Your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of, well, there's a number of issues combining here. One is unemployment, and particularly in professional level unemployment, the unique growth of jobs in non-competitive industries, and the increase in slave labour wages to maintain the industries and shops and businesses that are no longer viable in any meaningful sense, and also the huge growth in job applicants that are recent migrants to Australia. So, and when I say job applicants, I mean job applicants at the professional level, like field maintenance engineers, things like that. So. Now I was talking to quite a large engineering firm, and I was having a cup of coffee with the EVP, the executive vice president, and the HR director or VP of HR, whatever she was, came along, and it was all just chatting, and we had a contract with them, and it was all very congenial, and so they were just making offhand remarks and comments here and there that their observations of the situation, business and commercial situation as it is, and so we were sort of going back and forth on that. And they mentioned that now 72% of job applicants for professional level jobs, so this is not toilet cleaners or something, this is again, field maintenance technicians, engineering managers, that sort of stuff. And it's not at the C-suite level, but it's the level that would report to the C-suite. So 72% they mentioned were now foreign, recent migrants, maybe foreigners that have just got a work residence permit or whatever. Now, they were saying that not all, but most of them are Indian, and in some cases, nearly all of the applicants are Indian. So what's happening is that the Indians are coming into Australia en masse, like it's a fucking tsunami, for Christ's sakes, coming in en masse, and they're being gifted affirmative action jobs in government and so on. Or they get slave labour jobs in cafes and the like. So, the lower orders, the upper class people are getting gifted the government jobs, or they're getting gifted jobs in multinationals that have, huge affirmative action, DEI quotas, race quotas, and so on. But the Indians want to improve their status, so they want to get better jobs. And they pretend that they swan around, making out like they're hot shit and they're very entitled and that they've got but these jobs are gifted to them. They don't have to compete for them, nor could they in the days when Indians actually had to compete for jobs in Australia before affirmative action. They couldn't get jobs, so they just couldn't compete. It's only through affirmative action and DEI that they're able to compete. Well, they're not competing; they're just being gifted jobs through that, whether it be in the public service or whatever, or big multinationals that are being used effectively as mass migration funneling devices. So anyway, they have these jobs, then they want to get something in their own right. They want to be able to go out and get jobs, better jobs maybe. And the reality is the jobs that they're being given are do nothing bullshit jobs. I mean, and they work that out sooner or later. So they want to, no, I want a real job and I want to go out and apply. But this time they have to compete in the market. Now the affirmative action isn't so much in their favour. Sure, they can still find it in other big multinationals, but they, if they want to get out there and get a job on their own merits and their own right, then they have to compete with the rest of the crowd, and they just can't do it. So they scream and cry about racism and they are being racist towards me. So, but the reality is that they can't compete. They never could. This idea that, Indians are so clever, they're brilliant, they're this. Well, then how come India is such a shithole basket case? I mean, really, if all these Indians are so clever, why is India such a basket case? So the majority of these jobs, so 72%, I mean, this is insane. So if you have 100 applicants for a job, which for a professional level job is a lot of applicants. You have 100 applicants for a job, 72% of them will be recent migrants, where English is not their first language, and where maybe not all, but most will have the qualifications from some third world shithole university, the University of Ouagadougou or something, and which isn't worth a pinch of shit. And the only job or work experience they've got is some affirmative action bullshit job that they got gifted anyway when they came to Australia. So this is the majority now of applicants for professional level jobs, or professional level positions. And these people I was having a coffee with were mentioning this as quite a matter of fact in the overall conversation. They weren't condemning it or approving it, or they were just stating it was so. It was a fact. And the HR lady was saying that in amongst her HR contacts and HR clubs and little girly gossipy clubs that they get together in, that's pretty much happening around the traps. That's representative of what's going on. So that to me seemed strange. Now it also is combined with a second sort of adjustment or change in the professional employment landscape. When I was sort of, and still do it sometimes, but when I was, doing advertising for professionals, if I got, say, 10 applicants at this professional level, running the adverts in, at the time, initially newspapers rather than online, but there'd be 10 people, but 9 of the 10, all of them could do the job. So now if you get 10 applicants and they all can do the job and do it well, they're all well qualified, well credentialed, then that's a lot of people to choose from. Maybe you would interview most of them, or at least conduct initial screening telephone interviews, perhaps. But the 10 people applying, assuming they were all qualified, was good. Sometimes you'd have less than that. 3 or 4 people would apply, but again, all of them could have done the job. So you weren't sort of prevented from getting applicants. There was no one applied. What can we do? Or none of the applicants were qualified or suitable. It wasn't that way. You would get a small number of. Now the way the adverts were written at the time was very specific. You must have this qualification, that qualification, this experience. It was quite specific, but it was realistic. There wasn't like often, I see today that an advert will demand 10 years experience with a particular computer software, coding. That software was only released last week, and they're demanding 10 years experience with a bit of code that's only existed for 5 minutes. Fucking moron. So anyway, but this has changed. The HR lady was saying, and I've heard this around as well, that they measure the success of an advert, like an advert wanting to hire somebody, even at a senior and very specific level of expertise and professional level. They measure the success of the advert by how many applications. And if they get less than 100 applications, something must be wrong. They're not attracting a wide enough spread of people, or in their cognizance, they would see that. Now, they'd run an advert for I think it was like a technical engineering salesperson, something like that, I think it was, and they'd got 75 or 70 something applicants, 70, 80, whatever it was, less than 100 anyway, applications. And they figured that maybe, give or take about 20 were even worth looking at. The rest were just, you wouldn't even, give them the time of day. They were so unqualified. And there's these third world people, because they're gifted affirmative action jobs, they just think that all they have to do is apply for something and get it. And if they don't get it, it's because of evil fascist Nazi racists for stopping them. They've got no comprehension of skills and qualifications and experience. They can't comprehend it. All they can comprehend is the affirmative action gifts that they've been given. So anyway, out of say 75, 80 people, something around, only 20 people even minimally met the criteria. But 5 or 6 people were perfect, absolutely ticked every box. But to them, that wasn't good enough. Oh no, we don't, we can't pick from 5 or 6 people. We have to have hundreds, multiple hundreds, and so the concept of success. So I would, years ago, I would view it that if even one person applied who was, 100% sort of match, then that was still okay, because I still would get what I wanted. Even if people weren't 100% matched, I would pick the nearest match and then just work on them, assuming they were eager to learn, and then I could at least build them up or they could be built up rather to fit the job, and do what was required. So you still would get nearest match, and that was still an accepted way of doing it. But unless it's affirmative action and DEI, then it has to be a perfect match. But that criteria of perfect match only applies to straight white males. The minute it becomes a minority of female or brown or black people, then suddenly all that goes out the window, and the affirmative action and race gender quotas and all sorts of things become the prime issue, not the expertise. So the stringent requirement for absolute total match, tick every box expertise only applies to straight white males. Other people are cut various degrees of slack. But the interesting thing here is that at the professional level, now the majority, by far and away, the majority of applicants are recent migrants. Many of whom are optimistic dreamers, by the way. They're not even mildly close. I mean, in the business that I ever share in, we get, well, I wouldn't say flooded, but we get resumes every day from Muhammad in Pakistan or Bangladesh, and a G2 in India or something like that, with their sending their resumes, and will you sponsor me? And I'm a family man with 50 million kids, and there's this sort of stuff. And they come in just all the time, but they've got no concept of reality, as in a first world economy. They can't even conceive or comprehend of how it works. So that's one sort of development. It's interesting. Now, the government says that unemployment levels are only 4%. So we have to bring in gazillions and gazillions and gazillions of third world illiterate peasants. We have to bring them in. Mass migration. We just have, because employers have there's no one. They're putting adverts out for jobs and no one's applying. So we have to bring these people in. There's such a shortage of skills that we can only get from third world peasant economies, which is right. Now, just looking at this, and I don't know why the media aren't climbing all over this. It sticks out like a sore thumb, for goodness sakes. But I'm looking at one sort of satellite region of outer Sydney, and even after COVID had sort of gone, and pre-COVID, they had a permanent sort of level where online, at least, there were always about 2,000 jobs. Now, this is across the board, so this includes everything from toilet cleaners to CEOs and so on. So the 2,000 jobs were always advertised, give or take. Now, it could be 1,960 or 2,030, but it was always in that range. Now, that same area now has 1,300 jobs advertised. So it's 1/3 less than it was previously. So you can't tell me that there's a shortage of people to work when the amount of jobs advertised has fallen by 1/3. And yet, this particular area is slated in the propaganda rags and so on. The people there are screaming for workers, and the economy in the area can't grow, and we have to import gazillions of illiterate peasants from the third world, and that's going to help the area grow. What are you even talking about? The lies are just beyond, and the lies are so obvious, and yet they're not being called out by the media or the Fourth Estate generally. Now, there's another shift as well, that say the amount of jobs that were in the, say, above the average wage would be around 25% of the jobs were above the average wage, give or take, in this regional area. Now the amount of jobs that are above the average wage are about 5%. And that's also a huge shift. So not only are there much fewer jobs, but there are much fewer well-paying jobs in an area that they're trying to swamp with third world peasant labour. Now, in addition to this, there is an alleged shortage of people. For example, there's they use places that do pizzas. So we can't get pizza delivery folks. So we're really short on pizza delivery. But are you really? And I've mentioned this in many videos before. The conditions that they impose on these workers is such that you have to be on standby. We need to be able to call you 5 minutes with 5 minutes notice, and you come down and start delivering pizzas. But we're not going to guarantee you hours. So it's very difficult for anyone to work under those conditions where you've got no idea how many hours hours of pay you're going to get at any one time. You don't even know until 5 minutes before they call you that whether you get any work on that day or that evening at all. And you can turn up and the guy has. I've been talking to people that like parents that have kids that have done or attempted pizza delivery, and you arrive and they've got like maybe a small motorbike of some sort for pizza delivery, and it's pissing rain, and but they've got no raincoat for you, or you arrive and none of the motorbikes are working, and they'll demand that you have to use your own car or your own vehicle, but they won't give you any like petrol allowance or fuel allowance or anything like that. So and if you balk, well, hey, that's not real, well, why don't you fuck off then? And so the working conditions are diabolical. And the same goes in factories around the place, that particularly the entry-level jobs, where this idea of short-term employment and 6 or 12-month probationary period, so they can lay you off whenever they feel like it. So as soon as business slows down, they just put you out, or they can cut back your hours. Say, well, you got employed on a 5-day-a-week job, but we'll cut you back to 2 days a week. All these sorts of things. It's all done randomly and arbitrarily, so that and for the entry-level jobs, the pay is so bad that and if the factory's in an area where there's not much public transport, which they often are, by the way, then you have to have a vehicle. So the cost of running a vehicle and the cost of commuting to and from work takes up quite a big chunk of the pay. So that really people aren't interested in working at a place where they still have to live in their mother's basement or something like that, and they're working a 40-hour week. So what do employers do? Will they increase the wage? Absolutely not. Refuse point blank to do that. Will they offer other benefits, such as, say, breakfast, lunch, and dinner on site, which they can claim as a tax deduction, and would make a difference to a tight budget for an entry-level factory worker? And no, we're not going to do that. So the things that could be done to make a very big difference are just not done, ignored. And the constant refrain is import more people, import more people. We want more peasants for sweeping the floor and cleaning the toilet. Now we come to the next area of businesses that are benefiting the most from mass migration. Recently my wife and I took a drive out to some rural area, and this is again quite remote. Well, when I say quite remote, 3 hours outside of Sydney in driving. So there's you're driving past lots of farms with cows and sheep and horses and goodness knows what, and you can drive for a mile and not see a single house and all that sort of thing. So we're at that. So we came to a small, what I would classify as a small village, and the nail bar, the beauticians, was all peasant Asian chicks, Chinese chicks in the nail bar, clearly controlled by the Chinese mafia. They've got to buy everything from other Chinese businesses, and they run these little sort of clusters of Chinese businesses, and controlled by the central mafia secretariat. and you go to the corner shop and the gasoline petrol station, that's all Indians in there. And then you go to here, the grocery, that's all Indians, and so, and this is a place out in the middle of, long way out, but it's still got now I don't know how many, if you had to pay the proper wages for that nail bar, that beauty salon, or whatever you want to call it, it couldn't exist. It just couldn't exist on paying the proper wages. The cafes with the Indians and China, that couldn't exist without the slave wages. And some of these people, I didn't realize they're being put in these minibuses, and they're being driven for over an hour on the expressway to be delivered to this. So there's this controlled, mafia controlled, globalist slave labor system that's used. Now, none of these businesses would exist if it wasn't for the slave labor. So these businesses are not viable in any commercial sense. So we've got this increasing sector of the economy that is completely dependent on imported peasant slave labor, low wage, illegal wage slave labor. So the unemployment that supposedly exists is in this category. We don't have enough slave labor peasants to fill the demand for all these non-viable businesses. Now, what this means, though, is that you've got this staggering array of businesses, none of which are viable in any first world commercial sense, and they're all kept alive by it. So this is where this so-called unemployment exists. It's non-existent unemployment. It's an artificially holding up non-viable businesses such as these cafes and the nail bars and the like. But more concerning still, I believe, is where there's now a majority of applicants for professional level jobs that hitherto would be the exclusive domain of straight white males. But only straight white males are being held to the highest standards, the most stringent standards, unless there's somebody's buddy or something, stringent standards. Whereas, by contrast, and on a relative basis, the minorities, the recent migrants that don't speak English as a first language, they're being held to a much lower standard when in competition with the white people. If they had to compete sort of head to head, these recent migrants wouldn't have a snowball's chance. But in fact, they're being inserted in there with a sort of a softer version of DEI and affirmative action, but it's still there. And so straight white males, or even straight white people, including women, but straight white males in particular, running around saying, there's no jobs. There are no jobs out there. And I get this because the amount of guys that I know, the straight white males that are coming to me saying, hey, Billy Bob, you got any work for me? And so this is what's going on out there, and no one's talking about it. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.